I ended the last lecture module with a discussion of Descartes' epistemology of judgments. In that exposition, I introduced the notion of an idea of sensation. Ideas of sensation obviously play an important role in Descartes' epistemology of judgments, despite their being conceptually rather indistinct and ontologically rather amorphous. But the continental rationalists aren't the only thinkers that employ this notion of an idea in their ontological frameworks during the Enlightenment. The British empiricists famously also employed the concept of an idea. When we turn to England and we see John Locke, he is writing an essay concerning human understanding, publishing it in 1690, and in that work, he, like all British empiricists, seeks to understand the nature of the mind and its operations in order to more accurately understand and theorize about the nature, limits, and sources of human knowledge. In that work, he relies on the notion of an idea, again, rather conceptually indeterminate and ontologically amorphous, but he differs from Descartes in that he relies on a quite different metaphor with successful science in order to employ that concept and in order to structure his ontological framework. Specifically, he relies upon a notion that he runs across as a result of his association with the famous British chemist Robert Boyle, the corpuscularian philosophy. The corpuscularian philosophy is essentially the hypothesis that the world is composed of atoms and the void. As applied to theories of the mind, Locke assumes that ideas, or specifically simple ideas, are the fundamental atoms of the mental void. And in his analogical theoretical structure, then, those fundamental elements of the mind, those simple ideas, come into the mind, which is otherwise unpopulated, through experience. Once ideas enter into the mind, then the operations of the mind can manipulate them by adding them together, pulling them apart, comparing them to one another, or operating so as to abstract away from an individual particular idea. All of which result in complex ideas, which can then be broken down back into their simple components. That results in complex ideas. So, like Descartes, Locke wants to use ideas as simple representational structures. Like Descartes, they are relatively indeterminate as conceptual posits and ontologically rather indeterminate as well. For Locke, as we'll see, these ideas are the basis of a sort of mental chemistry, where understanding the nature and operations of the mind consists in understanding how those operations of the mind perform mental chemistry with these simple ideas in order to create new elements, new ideas, new thoughts, and so on. For Locke, then, this notion of ideas plays a clear representational role. And in fact, there are really, I would argue, two sorts of representational roles that ideas play. Ideas differ in the manner in which they represent objects, properties, and events out in the world. Simple ideas divide further into ideas of primary qualities and ideas of secondary qualities. Ideas of primary qualities represent their external world causes in virtue of resemblance. So a circular idea will represent circles by virtue of sharing that property of circularity. In contrast to those primary ideas, then, secondary quality ideas are ideas that represent secondary qualities like colors, taste, and smell, not in virtue of resembling their causes, as in shapes and quantity ideas, but instead in virtue of the causal covariation between the real-world property and the idea. So the simple idea of red represents the property red out in the world because the property red out in the world tends to cause that simple idea to enter into the mind through sensation. Thus, for Locke, sensation provides ideas, and reflection allows us to understand the representational content, which is imbued in them in one of two ways, either through their resemblance to those objects or properties out in the world, or their causal connection to those objects or properties out in the world. And of course, in this way, Locke differs from Descartes, who holds that the representational content of an idea of sensation is revealed through rational judgment and not something intrinsic to the idea itself.